What makes someone appear trustworthy? When Gregor McGregor arrived in London, his military history was well known. Starting out rising through the ranks of the British Army, he would eventually move to Venezuela, helping to fight for their independence. So, when he returned to Europe, talking about a nation rich beyond anyone's wildest imagination, people chose to believe the war hero. When he told those around him he was considered royalty in this country, titling himself the Prince of Poyais, they believed him. And when he told these people they too could be fabulously wealthy in this new world if they only paid him, they believed him. But this belief would lead to the deaths of 190 people, hoping for a better life for themselves and their loved ones. Not only was this country fictitious, but it would help Gregor McGregor become one of the most successful con artists in history, avoiding any punishment for his crimes or their consequences. This is the story of the Prince of Poyais, Gregor McGregor, and this is Learn Something New. Born on December 24, 1786 in Scotland, Gregor of the clan MacGregor was brought into a family of fighters, with his grandfather fighting in the 3rd Battalion of the Royal Regiment of Scotland, and his father having risen to a captain of an East India Company's vessel. And there were always new battles on the horizon. At the age of 16, MacGregor joined the British Army, right before the Napoleonic Wars were set to kick off. Within just 1 year, he had been appointed to lieutenant, though he wouldn't remain with that title for long, passing on the 7 years of hard work for a promotion and choosing instead to buy the rank of captain for himself, which was an acceptable practice at the time. Although he saw further promotions advancing his military career, after a disagreement with his senior officer, he requested a discharge from service, retiring from the army at the age of 24 in 1810, moving with his wife to Edinburgh. Now that he was in civilian life for the first time in his adult life, he tried to project an image of extreme importance given his military background and his wife's wealthy family. However, he failed to impress anyone, becoming more of an annoyance in the community than anything else, and so he moved back to London in 1811, introducing himself as Sir Gregor MacGregor. But after his wife passed away, his connections to her family were effectively cut off, along with his primary supply of money. In need of work once again, but now without the British Army as an option, he turned his eyes westward, looking for any conflicts that might be more lucrative, and taking inspiration from a Venezuelan revolutionary he had met in London, General Francisco de Miranda. So MacGregor sold off his belongings and sailed to South America, arriving in Venezuela in April of 1812, offering his knowledge and experience from fighting in the British Army to General Miranda, who eagerly accepted him into their fight, giving him the rank of colonel and putting him in charge of a cavalry battalion. Despite the fact that MacGregor had a bad habit of deserting his men whenever it seemed like they might start losing the battle, he continued to move up the ranks, becoming a general in the army of Venezuela at just 30 years old, seizing this moment to marry once again into a politically and monetarily advantageous relationship to the famous revolutionary Simon Bolivar's cousin. And it was in his Venezuelan military conquest that he happened across a stretch of coast in Nicaragua. The area was swampy and inhospitable, and its name, the Mosquito Coast, denoted the dangers of diseases like dengue and yellow fever present throughout. Despite this, MacGregor saw massive potential for a colony he could rule over, almost immediately sailing back to London to share the good news with the people. But last time they hadn't taken him seriously. Last time, it was nearly impossible for him to make a serious name for himself. And he wasn't about to let that happen again. And so, he took some creative liberties with his backstory from his time in the New World. He claimed that he was His Serene Highness Gregor I, Sovereign Prince of Poyais and its dependencies, and Cazique of the Poyer Nation, which was an obscure but extravagantly wealthy independent nation in the Bay of Honduras. Those in London had been exhausted and impoverished from years of fighting in the Napoleonic Wars, and the idea that fortune awaited them across the ocean was an overwhelming prospect that many hoped dearly was true. They believed Gregor McGregor, whether because of his confidence, his fabricated title, or the very real stories of his quick rise up the ranks in the Venezuelan military that had preceded his arrival, or just because they were desperate for some good news of a bright future. Regardless, he became known as His Highness Gregor, and a wealthy aristocrat gave him and his wife a country estate to reside in while they visited London. The city's Lord Mayor even held a banquet in his honor. MacGregor moved through the city as an overnight celebrity, a war hero turned royalty, engaging with high society through his tales of past military achievements and details about the elusive Poyais nation, greatly exaggerating both. But when pressed, he never panicked, producing official documents left and right from Poyais, supporting its legitimacy. He had a handwritten note from the king, a national flag, and maps that showed the country's expansive borders, nearly all of which he fabricated on the boat as it sailed back to Europe. These only added fuel to the fire. And now that people believed he was telling the truth, MacGregor made a play for their money. He put a £200,000 Poyais bond in the London money market. He pre-sold land and titles to hopeful colonists, telling them that they could purchase 100 acres of fertile farmland for just £11. As for high society individuals with deeper pockets, they bought military ranks in the Poyais military, but others bought roles as government employees and bankers. All while knowing none of this existed, MacGregor raked in hundreds of thousands of pounds of profit. And as 1822 came to an end, the Poyais frenzy was reaching its climax. MacGregor had begun printing Poyais currency in Europe, allowing future colonists to exchange their life savings from valuable pounds to worthless Poyais dollars. And in September of 1822, the first ship left London. A few months later, a second ship left Scotland. These ships, full of hopeful colonists, would eventually find themselves on the Mosquito Coast. But there was no wealthy New World nation, only the dense, swampy jungle MacGregor had laid his eyes on 2 years prior. The colonists tried to cobble together huts to survive after having expended most of their resources just to get there, but it wasn't long before the diseases began to spread throughout the population. In May of 1823, a British ship from a nearby colony found the group and began to evacuate them, but nature had already taken its toll. Of the 250 hopeful immigrants that arrived seeking a better future, only 60 of them would make it back to England and Scotland. Some were unhappy with MacGregor, who coincidentally had chosen to extend his stay in Europe rather than leave with the colonists. But some still believed his story, writing in the papers that his collaborators in Poyais had failed him. By the end of 1823, MacGregor snuck away to Paris, where he published a Poyais constitution and began once again recruiting hopeful colonists. But the French government didn't believe him, arresting him on suspicion of fraud, though he was acquitted on a lack of evidence. Realizing that London appeared to be where his scheme worked best, he returned, issuing a new £800,000 bond and selling more fake land certificates, continuing the scheme until the late 1830s when investors began trying to track down the one responsible for paying them what they were owed on the Poyais bonds. It was at that moment he decided to return to Venezuela. There, he was given a hero's welcome and a full military pension due to his participation in their war for independence, and he lived the remainder of his life there, wealthy and free from imprisonment for his crimes, but never to return to his home country, passing away at the age of 59 in 1845. When The Economist attempted to calculate the value of his bond market frauds, they found the 1.3 million pounds of bonds equated to a modern 3.6 billion pounds. Gregor McGregor was a charming individual with a quick wit and conversation, but throughout his life he was burdened with extreme narcissism. Even from his earliest moments in the military, it was always about the titles he held and the people he had connections with. When he presented himself as the Prince of Poyais, he was constantly updating his appearance with new badges, pins, and stripes that showed his importance to the Poyais nation, which, in turn, he felt should show his importance to the people of London. People he wanted to notice him, people he wanted to respect him. Even though he spent a lot of time trying to capture as much money from hopeful settlers and investors as possible, his initial inspiration for the scheme was not born from a place of greed for wealth, but of fame and notoriety. However, back in Loch Katrine, MacGregor's ancestral home and birthplace, there remains a graveyard for the MacGregor clan, with notes detailing some of the great achievements of great men. But for someone who lusted after fame and legacy, in this place, there is no mention of Gregor McGregor, the Prince of Poyais. Thank you for watching Learn Something New. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Or if you want, you can check out the channel's Patreon, linked below in the description. Special thanks to the channel's patrons, including our newest Patreon member, Tristan Hrabi. But as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.